History is always ripe for revision, especially when it's the kind of history recorded by Europeans that attempts to understand far-off parts of the world. That can describe much of the recorded history of the Pacific region, which in the past has veered wildly off the mark. Dr. Mulrooney is a Bishop Museum anthropologist who's taken a fresh look at one of the most mysterious of Pacific Island cultures, Rapa Nui, or Easter Island, and says it's time to challenge some long-held assumptions. Good morning.
Good morning.
Your task as an anthropologist studying Rapa Nui is in part dealing with a lot of existing misconceptions, right?
Definitely.
What are they?
Well, the popular story of Rapa Nui has to do with the word collapse.
Uh-huh.
And so the story that's been told, or the popular narrative about the island's past, is that people sort of lost sight of what they were doing in terms of their terrestrial resources because they became more and more obsessed with building very large statues called moai.
Uh-huh.
And
the images that we all know of Easter Island.
Yes, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
They've reached worldwide monumental status.
Exactly,
right?
Yeah.
And so what the popular story proposes, or the popular narrative proposes, is that at some point in the island's prehistory or before European contact, people cut down all of their trees. Mm-hmm. And a lot of scholars such as Jared Diamond will tell you that Rapa Nui society self-destructed.
Mm-hmm.
And so what our team has been doing is working for a number of years on the island to look at the empirical evidence for or against this cultural collapse.
Mm-hmm.
And so what my research does in particular is look at settlement patterns, or look at where people are choosing to settle on the island,
mm-hmm.
and looking at how the chiefly economy that really supported the statue building industry developed through time.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we look at is where people are settling, what they're doing, how they're using the resource base on the island. And so what we've shown over the last few years by looking at soil nutrient dynamics is that by deforesting the island, which from sort of a European perspective or a Western perspective is necessarily a bad thing.
Fouling your nest, in a sense.
Yeah, what we've noticed is that by deforesting the island and by intensifying the agriculture, by strategically placing rocks on the surface and also into the soils with lithic mulching,
mm-hmm.
what people actually did, what the ancient Rapa Nui actually did, was to enhance their environment and to enhance their terrestrial resource base and the soil nutrient dynamics. And that's where the evidence lies for that. So it really takes that deforestation leading to collapse story and it turns it upside down.
And it makes a lot more sense that people would move in a way that enhanced their survival rather than in a way that assured their destruction. I mean, one of them is sort of this fall of the Roman Empire fantasy of these people who destroy their own livelihood by idolatry, is in a way, yeah?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, definitely. And so if you look at the moai, what the moai really are a testament to that,
mm-hmm.
that survival and that sustainability. You know, only in a thriving society can you have specialists, can you afford to have specialists who are carving statues on a full-time basis.
And yet the European assumption was that they neglected their own feeding themselves in order to create these huge idols, yeah?
Yeah, definitely. So the sort of popular conception is that they cut down the trees and that they aided in the transport of the statues.
Mm-hmm.
And the oral tradition doesn't support that story either,
mm-hmm.
right? According to the oral traditions that people will tell you on Rapa Nui, indigenous Rapa Nui people will tell you that the statues walked to the ahu. And so in terms of the resources used in that process, they'll tell you that they walked with their mana.
Wow.
Right? Because the moai are deified ancestors.
Mm-hmm.
And so, of course, it took a lot of help, I'm sure, by the indigenous population.
One would assume, yeah.
Yeah, but perhaps it wasn't just help in terms of logs for rolling on, for
mm-hmm.
example. I'm sure that there was definitely, some resources that were used in that process. But the main resource that we really want to think about when it comes to statue construction is feeding the workers. Yeah.
Is the history and anthropology of the areas of the world you deal with in the Pacific, is it more polluted by past false assumptions than it is in other areas of the world?
No, I think that it's a global phenomenon.
Everybody gets it wrong.
Everybody gets it wrong, and everybody comes into any situation with their own preconceived notions about what they're observing.
Uh-huh.
And of course, the Pacific is no exception to that. And, over at the Bishop Museum, what we've been currently working on is renovating Pacific Hall. And that's going to open on September 21st. Mm-hmm. And so the museum is abuzz. It's a hive of activity right now as we prepare to unveil Pacific Hall. And to really, in terms of those misconceptions, Pacific Hall really breaks down many of them and celebrates not only the diversity of cultures in the Pacific region, but also the connectedness and engagement of those cultures with one another.
And maybe sets the record straight in quite a few different areas, it sounds like.
Definitely. And up on the second floor, we have about 2/3 of the objects come from our archaeological collections that were collected by Bishop Museum archaeologists throughout the last 50 years or so. And so what's really neat for us is to really update that hall and update the scholarship and use our existing collections to tell the story and to tell the current state of knowledge about this region.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. And, as always, the truth is more interesting than the perceived fantasy that preceded it. Mm-hmm. Dr. Mara Mulrooney is an assistant anthropologist in the anthropology department at Bishop Museum. Her paper, The Myth of AD 1680, is online. That deals with what we just discussed about Rapa Nui.